I like that idea. Do you ever have an opinion?
I usually do, but sometimes I'm just stay quiet. Right now, I'm just munching on things, so it's muted and I don't bother
Ah,
talking.
you can either think or eat noodles, just not both.
No.
You'll burn yourself, I suppose. Okay.
Okay, recording
I
on
want to fix
sound from my end.
sound from my end.
Okay.
Okay, so I just fiddled with my settings to change sensitivity because I'm not wearing headphones. And technically, with this microphone, because it's using the the I can't even remember what the term is. I can go and fetch my manual, but I'm not gonna. Um, Cardioid, I believe, is the name of the pattern to try to block out excess sound that isn't in front of it. So I've got you on desktop speakers, and so my microphone isn't picking up that audio somehow. I don't. I don't know why it's that good because
Well,
I didn't pay that much money
for the Yeti one that you're moving around,
for the
or you mean
yes for
different one?
the for my lower quality microphone.
Lower quality.
Um, so yeah, I banged my knee so bad that I have a limp now. Oh, I'm gonna be wrecked for a day.
It's
It's
only
gonna be
temporary.
awful.
After this, go.
We are recording, correct?
Yes.
Okay, that has to be edited out.
All good thing this never sees the light of day.
Well, okay, that means I'll have to edit it out.
I'll make a notepad here. Good thing I can
Okay,
do this
so
on my end.
well, probably not because I'll end up listening to everything and have to figure that stuff out. And I'll at
So,
least prep the clips and you'll trim them and clean them up for upload and stuff.
yeah.
So I'll just do the heavy lifting in terms of lifting it all.
Okay.
So it should work out okay. Want you to have you've got other stuff. I did go and look up. So I guess it would be called um, like a LAN VoIP solution. There are so in terms of how this audio is being done is we're so we have our microphone and we're piping that data across the internet and then receiving it to get it on your end. But there are LAN VoIP solutions that don't require an internet connection at all. So they're not sending any data out there. So it wouldn't need any authentication from some internet service. It wouldn't need to stream any data at all. It would just be local. And I'm looking into that. There appears to be there's a handful of solutions, but the one that I'm thinking about is called Tox, and it's TOX. And Tox is the protocol that TikTok is using. And I have only learned to hate TikTok, but I'm looking into the actual underlying technology behind it. And so, as far as I can tell, it's got an open source infrastructure, and it's made with a secure protocol and all this kind of stuff. And there's a few clients, one of which I think will work pretty well. So I'll do some testing before next time, and we can work on that. And it will do video as well. So this is going to give you the option to receive, like for me to talk and for me to be on a camera, and you'll be able to do what you want with it, and that will never have the problematic constraints of using a third party service, having any bandwidth concerns that way. I mean, I've had days when Discord does it's down, or you get the robot voice on Discord, or all the other things that could happen that shouldn't happen. This lets us be in separate rooms and we can appropriately pad them, or now this is not near like a living room, a dining room, anything like that. It's not near a kitchen, and I'm pretty sure dishwashing was picked up in the past.
Oh, we
And
still
so
haven't
this
listened to
means
past
that,
recordings.
sorry?
We haven't listened to past recordings yet.
Yes, so that's also something that I want to do is after we're done today, um, And if we have to end early, but probably, again, when I said like 15 minutes a day or something, theoretically speaking, this is an hour a day or something that you can commit, preferably at the same time every day, because you need to have some way of getting this stuff done.
Yeah.
One of those things is um, you have to uh, like migrate everything from the laptop to your desktop, begin a backup procedure because you've already got the hard drives, and then hand me the data so that I can begin things on my end. So between every show, what I want to push for is one solid adjustment. It's not necessarily an improvement, but it's a process improvement, a little bit of documentation, and then one new thing. And so, for example, for next one, maybe it would be testing a Talks client, or maybe it would be testing it live. Would be doing this in a private recorded stream or something like that. Would be the thing, and then the next show after would be another thing, and then another thing. And if we push that, um, that my philosophy is you've got an idea of momentum where as long as you keep doing the same and then just one tiny iterative improvement, a bit of exploration or a bit, and those adjustments, it's just the one thing, so that if you make a mistake, or and you can just roll it back, and there's only one change. So we wouldn't want to go and do like an actual show that's restreamed on DLive and Twitch and YouTube simultaneously while using a new VoIP client, while and just we'll experiment with this new streaming setup, and I'll get a new microphone. And if you do that all at once, something will break in there,
So
probably.
introduce a change and just introduce one change every session.
Yeah, and that way your brain only has to deal with that tiny bit of expansion of expertise, that little bit of work. And those little adjustments, they tend to just be part of that 20% time that I had talked about. And so they're pretty straightforward to do. Um, One thing I do want to note before I forget is you need to make sure that you understand that there is a hard time for you to make yourself available.
I
We
honestly,
need to have,
yeah, I honestly, jeez.
yeah, you forgot. Yeah,
No, I
okay,
was
well,
thinking I would have died halfway through the run.
yeah, and then just give up. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah,
Okay, so no, I guess that didn't happen.
no, it didn't
Um,
happen. So I'm just going to not do anything that requires me that I can't just drop and
well,
walk away
like, so I mean, a half an hour before
an
this,
hour before because this took me
before
45
our
minutes.
checklist, is you would have a setup where you would finish up what you're doing within that hour. You would never start anything new, and then you just switch to like reading comics or something, and just chill out, and then we could go through the checklist, the pre-show checklist. Everything should already be set up in a certain way. So one of the tricks is if you've got if you have, let's say, a space with physical things that you're working with, and so you pursue an activity and it makes a mess, and it's something that you want to do. It's your practice. It's your art of some sort. And so let's just use being a painter as an example. So say you're a painter. Imagine that you are well off enough to have a room for that stuff, and you go in and it's every day and you got plenty of free time. You're like an art student, and for some reason you don't care about money, and right, you go to your room and you paint. But the thing is, the fact that you have done that yesterday will actually impact the experience of you pursuing it today, because after having done it yesterday, you've used that environment. You have created a bit of chaos that's been deposited there, a bit of mess with the paints, with with all of your tools for whatever you were trying to do will kind of be a little out of place. And so when winding down, when you're pursuing a task, you don't want to pursue it hard and then burn out and stop. what you need is to have an arc where you push it hard, depending on, so for studying or for an art, it's you might push yourself, but really what you want to do is you want to have a little gentle curve where you get up to speed, or I guess from so you get up to speed, and then you'll notice you get a little tired. So say you're writing a book, you get a little bit tired, and then you notice that, and you don't just continue. You don't push. Same with studying. That's a terrible study technique. So you do it. You get your brain engaged. You make sure you have no distractions. You turn your phone off. You tell people to go away. Don't visit me. And then when you wane a little bit, you stop. You go do something else, but you don't do something else for more than, so like between segments for us, 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more, maybe, right? If we stop a little early, it'll be little bit longer. And then you can come back to it after, for studying hard for a student, after 5 minutes, and you do it again. Because if you're like, okay, well, I'm going to study 8 hours a day, you begin in the morning, you be effective, right? You can imagine the curve is nice and high. You're effective, and then at some point you slump, and then you just crash, and you're just spinning your wheels, not committing stuff to memory. And if you are committing stuff to memory, you're committing stuff to memory when you're in a state that you're not going to have when you're doing an exam or something. So that study time is useless, and only that beginning, depending on you, right? Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's a half an hour. But if you were to ramp up to speed, take a small break, then get back to it, maybe that next little hump of productivity isn't as high as the first one because you get a little tired over the day, but you get this little wave, as opposed to just this big high wave that crashes and never recovers for the rest of however many hours. And so that's your attention and your tiredness. But there's a version of that with a room or with a project where you're creating that chaos, where you've got the detritus of the dust, the mess, the whatever. And it could be, there's a digital version of it as well, where you're producing stuff. And so just like when you have that little hump with the brakes, what you can do is you don't push, and at the end, before you don't come back from a break. At the end, you need to know when your end is, and don't do that additional little hump worth of work, and then just stop. That very tail end needs to be, work break, work break, work break. It needs to be work break, then like a repair, and then you end. So that last segment of your effort needs to be taking what you've accomplished and wrapping it up and cleaning the room and resetting, like putting the chair back and putting all your stuff away and making it all nice. Because what will happen is, yesterday you might have had great accomplishments for what you wanted to do. You have goals that you've achieved things. But when it comes to today, and you want to go and get back into it, you're going and you're getting back in, and you're stepping into a room that's a mess, a tornado of yesterday that is still there. And now, in order to wind back up, to even get into the mood in the first place, you have to deal with being in that space. And you might not even have the headspace to actually go back and reset the entirety of the room. You'll just leave things kind of messy, kind of where they are already. And every time you either come back from a break, or while you're like doing a new thing, you'll have to go hunt for whatever, a new paintbrush, or you'll have to, and they're all buried somewhere weird where you last left them last time. But now your experience of pursuing painting, let's say, is you I have one brush. Okay, I got to clean it. Okay, now I'm using it. I need another brush. Okay, I got to find that one and clean that one. Okay. And now every single day with that bad habit, your day involves, your efficacy is reduced because you're constantly distracted by, and it ends up being this weird intimidation where tomorrow comes and you stand at the doorway of that room, and it's just this awful mess, and it's a mess from yesterday and the day before and the day before, and it just gets oppressive to be in, so that you are intimidated at the prospect of even, like, maybe you love painting, but now it becomes more and more work, more difficult. So what ends up happening at the end of every project, every event of whatever variety that you do, the tail end of it needs to be, it's still fresh in your head. Like, you're not divorced from the accountability of cleaning up. If it was cleaning up after something that you did a week ago, it feels different. If it's cleaning up after something you just did right now, that's that feels closer, that feels easier. And it kind of is easier. And it's a great way to unwind after all of that effort. So at the tail end of something like what we're doing here, a show, we might press stop recording, stop streaming. There will be a cool down checklist. So for a person who works out, there's the idea of warm-ups and cool downs. So you do your warm-up might be some stretches, some light things, and then you have a workout of whatever variety. Maybe you're working on upper body one day, lower body the next day, whatever routines. And then there's a cool down period. And the cool down period is really important, because if you don't cool down properly, you you might have stiffness in ligaments or whatever other oddities, and you might have very significant pain from. So, for example, if you do a lot of work with muscles, your muscles build up. I cannot recall there's science behind it. Your muscles actually build up a kind of toxin, and that's where fatigue comes from. Where if you're doing a lot of it, you get real pain, really serious pain. And there are, for example, massages or whatnot, or hot water, or this kind of stuff. And part of your cool down would be attending to that, or you will suffer. And tomorrow's work is, if a person's working out every day for some reason, then tomorrow's workout or the day after would just be hell, because they're not cooling off. So an equivalent for this show would be defining the tail end. Maybe we would have a 15-minute break, but not too long at the end for us. It's ended for other people, but for us, it continues a little bit further, so that we still have it's still fresh in our mind, and we would do the tidy up. So it might be initiating the backups. Um, it might be just finishing interacting with the public, for example, because the last thing you want to do is just end things dead when there are people that are like super chatting or something like that. It's like that's an engagement opportunity that you still want to pursue, and maybe you need to put maybe I need to put my microphone back, and I need to do this, and I need to, right? So there could be a checklist just to make life really easy, or whatever. So the the warm up, the warm up 15 minutes, that has to be kind of a hard starting point to make sure everything is up and running technically. But you would have like an hour before, whatever, which is like a soft alarm, soft deadline, where it can just be like, hey, finish up what you're doing, chill out for a while, get ready, go for a walk or have a drink or whatever. And then the hard deadline of 15 minutes checklist, begin show. We have the 50-10 idea, which still sounds really good. 50-10, 50-10, 50. And then we would stop. Maybe we personally would have a 10. And then we would have some process of just winding down, where we do certain things, whatever those things end up being. I don't know. So that's the warm up cool down concept. Um, what else can we? I mean, I can pivot topics. How much time do we have? So that was a half hour. So I didn't have any segment notes, so I guess I could talk about something random. Um, I heard about. I think The Last of Us 2 is yet another bomb. Um,
Oh God.
I don't really have my ear to the ground, but I I was aware of The Last of Us 1 being really good. I didn't even know it got remade, but apparently it did, and that's
Oh,
amazing.
got updated and things
Yeah,
changed.
changed. So like we're talking so I know
It
that
was a
people
good
do the
game.
graphics engine.
Mm,
Um they'll do graphics engine updates and stuff like that. Are you saying that there was like additional bug fixes or was there feature improvement?
probably.
Okay, so you don't play the game yourself, too?
I played the first one. Or I played the original one, not the one that got remastered.
Not the gold edition or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and apparently number two came out, and it's yet another one of these games where, for some reason, all the critics really, really love it, and they're using the exact same cut and paste language, and all of these other,
Well, if you ever want to be in good standings with Sony, you have to do what they say, and Sony apparently
yeah.
has histories of market
So
manipulation.
the phrase is access media, and it's it's this little game where if you're a reviewer, we don't even have to say a professional reviewer attached to an actual publisher on a blog or anything like that. Just some detached person. That person can be a reviewer who's excellent and they are given access to an event or a beta or whatever the heck for the review to and it's part of the desire is that the developer they think they have a good product. Like I don't here's hoping, right? And so they're confident and then they give their best foot forward out to all of these reviewers who look at their stuff and the notion is that they'll get good reviews because they made a good thing, you know, question mark. Whether or not the market agrees is something else. And so if you're a reviewer, you get the stuff, you review it, and you're honest, and you report on it. And if something isn't a 10 out of 10, you say so. But if the developer of the game says, you know, I I wanted a 10 out of 10. Like, I don't know. I think you got it out for us. I think whatever. Like you brought up this other stuff, or we didn't want you to discover this yet. We were still working on fixing that. One of these, we'll release it and put out a 0-day patch or whatever nonsense. And then what happens is that particular individual or maybe their platform, their house, their blog that might have multiple reviewers, whatever it is, will have will not be selected. If there's a competition of a whole lot of reviewers and some of them are more favorable, and they'll like nudge, nudge, wink, wink with the developer, and you'll, as a player, if you ever play a game and and there's something wrong when you're playing it and you go to reviewers, professional reviewers, and they're like, this is a great commentary on this is the gameplay is just wonderful, and they'll gloss over a problem that might be a showstopper for you, like Last of Us 2. PewDiePie was streaming it, was just full on streaming the whole gameplay of the entire damn thing, like 10-hour days of just streaming it. And uh, it's not exactly a spoiler, but you play the game, and there are characters with positions like there are good guys and bad guys kind of thing. Every game's got this sort of thing, and this is a fairly emotionally driven game. And there's a character that's a bad guy, and you go through the game, play the game, you like it or you don't, whatever the heck, and you get to the end, and then the game's like, would you like to continue playing the game? Now you can continue. Like this is the next segment of gameplay. So like you're done now. Here's the rest of the game, and the rest of the game is now you can play as the bad guy, and it's the bad guy that you've learned to really despise for the entirety of like And PewDiePie's like, nah, delete. This is because he says, well, he's, after playing that much, and he didn't like the game. He didn't like the game, and he really, really didn't like having to constantly be antagonized by this other bad character. It's a bad guy character. It's not a bad character. It's a character who is the antagonist, the bad person. So he could not justify to himself uh, actually being in those shoes. He just didn't want to do it. And I think the other controversy was, because they were in trailers too. I think was I'm not. Maybe I shouldn't spoil it because maybe it's something because you were talking about
I'm
wanting to
not
stream.
touching that game.
I think it would be awesome to play games when they're old and just go through. I would because it has been my hobby for the last since like the mid to late 90s to review stuff, and that's why I've got thousands and thousands of articles written, and I've looked through games before, and I would love to go through quote unquote old games because now if a game is 2 years old, it's old, right? Which is a real shame. I think that's absolutely awful. I think there's too much. I hate saying that there's too much competition, but technically there is too much competition and things get watered down. I love the quality of indie games these days. Now that it's possible to have quality, not just like good ideas that are implemented awkwardly, that you can just reuse an engine from somebody else, and you can get up on a distribution platform, and you can get out there, and you can all the assets you can at least purchase, and etc. Indie games can be really well done now, um, but there's so much new water being poured into that cup that now it's stuff gets old real quick, which is a shame because there's really good stuff. But I could imagine streaming games that are X number of years old. So they're considered, they have exited from the public mind. And they may be AAA games, they may be well reviewed, they may be good, they may be bad. And there's drama, it's just not interesting anymore. So it's just gone. And go through and just play that honestly. And possibly there would be the game of I would just review it blind, and you could go through all of the critic reviews and stuff like that, and I would just go through and just be honest about how I'm playing it, and we'll see how it compares to actual professional reviews. If like playing No Man's Sky. Did you ever play No Man's Sky?
Nope, I'm not even gonna touch it.
No. So um I was there from day zero, day -1. I was on board well before the game was even showing anything. And so I was caught up in this is before the hype train left the station. It was hyped. And the thing is, I'm a really, really big proponent of um, procedural generation in general. One of my largest complaints for a lot of video games is this game is great, but it would be nice if this map was randomized somehow, whatever that means. Because I come from an era that has things like roguelike games. And you know that term because you've used it for me describing a game. So do you know what the term roguelike, where it came from?
Uh,
So that's a no.
Gone rogue. No.
Okay. So computers didn't have color, right? Early computers didn't have a lot. And so early computers didn't have color, they didn't have graphics. They had text, and there were text adventure games. And there was one class of text adventure game called Rogue. And there were a lot of variations of it, but this is the core notion comes from the game Rogue, um, which is a top down. It is I don't you've played tactics strategy games where you have a move and then the world has a move and then you have a move. And so in an RPG type game, like a JRPG classic, is the combat is frozen in time. You make your choice, bad guys make their choice, and maybe your characters get different choices in different orders. And right, you've got spell points that you're spending, and and you perform actions in this manner. And there's a lot of games that do that. And Rogue was like that because the amount of like it just wasn't feasible to have your computer thinking all the time. So it was just snapshots in time as you were playing. So like you'd move left and then everything was else would have an action and then you move left and it was just with text. It was just characters. So you were a little at symbol and walls were made out of dashes and the small D was a dog and the big D was a dragon and stuff like that. And you'd actually learn all these upper and lowercase monster letters and is actually a really good game. My favorite was a variation called Angband, Angband, and it was slightly modified. But the thing is, because absolute nerds made this stuff, it was very heavily borrowed from Lord of the Rings, like really, really deeply. This is before Lord of the Rings was popular. Like now, this is this is older than color, for at least for computers. And so this is older than the movies. This is older than um, this. What would have this would have been the 80s for this game, this stuff. Anyhow, the great the replayability of this game was that the actions of all the enemies that you might face had some randomness to it, where they appeared, what was there, what was here, and it was a dungeon crawler in the most primordial sense. You would go through the game and not exactly a maze, but there are rooms and there's passages and blah blah, and you're hunting to do things, kill stuff, find treasure, whatever the heck, and you'd find a stairwell going down, and you'd go down the stairwell, and then a new map would be generated, and it would just be different every single time, and that that concept was not repeated for basically any other game um, until fairly recently, where this procedural generation became a buzzword. And the before between then and now, there was just large maps, and we had the idea of open world stuff. And you might have random events that pop up in different places, but the buildings are all the same. It's the same city, the same layout. So something like Grand Theft Auto was a uh, a huge place, and you might have loading screens between segments of the world and stuff like that. But it was huge and it was fixed, and you might have NPCs wandering around, and that's a little variation. You might have different events that happen, and how enemies try to fight you or how cars move. There's some variation, but the world is the world, and that right. That's like the world we're living in now. It's just like that's how reality is. However, there is the notion that you can generate a new dungeon at every stairwell, and a game like No Man's Sky had the hype of promising that in terms of landscape for stuff for this planet, and they'd all be different and blah blah blah. And the hype train for it was so they made a lot of promises, and goddamn did they fail miserably at everything. I mean, it was the disappointment was I so it this was the first game where I learned that the revision, the model number of my CPU mattered for this game, because this game was optimized for a certain generation of processor. It wasn't like, oh, this requires 1.8 gigahertz or better. It was, this game requires this revision of processor, or with this feature set, or whatever,
That,
right?
that seems kind of strange, even for
Well, it's the first time I've ever heard of a game doing that, ever.
on
I mean,
PC.
I knew about things like okay, so back in the day, it would be like this game requires a 386, or this game requires a 386DX, which is a math coprocessor. Nowadays, that stuff is cooked into your processor, so it or it would be like 33 megahertz or greater, or and so I understand the notion of the X or better, but we've had the same we we as consumers, let's call hobbyists who understand the underlying hardware a little, will we see maybe specs from third parties which may or may not be accurate depending on at least that's uh, the reviews for hardware. Let's say for a CPU have some grounding in reality. It's not the opinion of the reviewer, so there's not exactly the access media problem there. Although there are some weird nuances because it just so happens that a particular CPU has been a little rigged to perform better on that particular test, just not necessarily better in general as a processor, just so they can like squeak by a little bit better, which is kind of dumb. People that understand a little bit of the hardware know about some nuances that happen with processors, but No Man's Sky is the first time I've ever heard of a game that so leveraged something from a specific market of CPUs that other people who happened to not purchase the right generation of CPU would get locked out. And they didn't tell anyone this crap. Or, man, I maybe they did somewhere or other. I don't know. And
No, I
I just
doubt it,
remember,
because everything that um I can't remember his name right now. Anything that he said was documented,
well,
and
the
after it
developer,
was released, and everything that he said that was included that wasn't, he got
yeah,
thrown, or didn't get thrown under the bus, but he got burned really badly.
there's always that one guy on Reddit that does a complete breakdown, that that glorious autist that goes through the history of all of the interviews and all of the gameplay, quote unquote gameplay, it was faked, all the trailers, and just does a point by point with like circles and just this was promised, this was delivered, that was promised, that was delivered, and just I don't think I kept it, but certainly it's out there for No Man's Sky, and it's a long thread with links everywhere. With and it's just I I would I don't know what I would do if I were faced with something as a developer, having been called so thoroughly on the level of bullshit, is the level of like the hype train was so off. I don't it, there was some other imaginary game that the hype train ran off to, and the thing that was released was just not anywhere near that. Just it was not even a finished game. It was so bad. But me, I got it. And so first off, I paid money for it to get it, download it, play it, and I can't even execute it because I ran into this like, oh, you need this particular revision of a CPU. It's like, okay, well, what the hell? With everybody else, we're like, well, okay. And the devs are scrambling around. I got access to a beta channel in Steam for other updates for the game behind the scenes. Um, and I don't, it's not a particular achievement, so this is not insider knowledge. A lot of people got this, and the the devs were releasing like little builds, and This is how dumb the decision for having, like, we'll call it locking to certain technologies in a CPU. They're bad decision for the locks because they ended up after a fashion um, going and making some change or other changes to alleviate that requirement. So I can, well, actually, I've got a new computer now, but in between there, when the game matured slightly more, um, they did whatever they did, and that restriction was gone. Which mean that was probably hell on earth, and they were working 16-hour days, right? Sleeping at the I've heard some of the stories actually. Yes, sleeping at the office and working incredibly late. The cops got called because they thought that their office was getting broken into because there were people. The lights on were on it late at night, and all this is boxes of pizza. The developers are legendary for accumulating during these 0-day nightmares. Um, and so the devs did end up remedying that problem, which means that they didn't need to have made that technological decision in the first place. So I don't know where their brains were, but they made design decisions that were just wrong. And maybe it's because you can say that they're new, but they weren't at that point. This was not their first game. This was certainly not the lead or any of the other
Oh, I
developers'
think they were an
first
indie
project.
company, and then Sony brought them on because they liked their concepts.
Sony. Yeah, Sony was probably the drive behind why things got
Well, he got
sold the way
backed
they
by
got sold.
Sony, and then he got on a huge. Oh, we're backed by these guys. Let's say I think we can make a lot of improvements.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing when you're backed by somebody big and those big guys, suddenly you've got all the obligations of the fixed requirements levied by that giant. So the giant will say, well, okay, this and this and this got promised. These are the timelines. Make it happen. This is the hard release day, and all of these other things. And it's that is probably their first time interacting with a big fish. I guess you can call Sony a whale. Um, and they it does seem as though they pushed the game out the door and they cut features along the way because they couldn't meet those obligations. A true independent indie game, indie effort um, would have floundered and failed because they actually would want to um, implement all the things they promised.
Or as
Usually, what
much.
they would do. Sorry.
Or as much.
Well, these guys, if they didn't have Sony breathing down their neck, I'm sure what they would have done is extend their deadline and cut into profits, use their personal finances, get loans, just to get more development in there before the release to actually implement the features that they promised. But what is nice about that game is after the fact, and it's not like they got around to it after the fact, they actually worked harder than any other game probably in history to make things right. And it wasn't even a matter of ethics of we made this promise, we're making good. It's they didn't even bring it up again. So they weren't like virtue signaling over, oh, we're great, we're doing all this to they came out and none of their updates cost money. It was just a new massive surprising amount of improvements and adjustments, and then again and then again and then again, and it's not a recognizable game compared to what I had originally fiddled with. I, I fiddled with some really wacky technology that did stuff as far as like emulating some of the functionality in those other CPU generations in order to let me play. It's like you really don't want to muck about in that kind of crap, like serious developer stuff. And it was not successful. A loading screen crashes. My god, and they're erratic. And the infinite load screen. People didn't understand holding down what key was it? Because I was using controller, so it's you hold the X key, X button to like log into the game to actually begin the game, and people didn't know that. It just had an X. So I press X. I just be like, I pressed X and it doesn't do anything. I press X and it doesn't do anything. I sit there going, this game doesn't work. Imagine that. I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to press and hold X? That's the first, like, why? Why? Why would I even want, why would it prompt me to do anything? Just go through the load screen, stop, then give me the game. Give me a menu. Don't go through a load screen, make me hold the X key down, and then they launched a second load screen. Oh god. I think they still do that too. Anyhow, that's the worst developer decisions in the history forever. I think we're out of time actually. We're at break.
4 minutes.
4 minutes. Oh, for okay. Am I doing the math wrong?
We started a bit late because.
Well, yeah, but we still need to honor the hard deadlines, remember? Whether or not we start early, we
Oh,
would break.
okay, then yeah, we're 4 minutes over.
Yeah, okay. So why don't we now we'll begin late. So we ourselves, the humans, need to have our 10 minutes. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes
Yeah.
and we can switch topics. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so see you in 10. And we're back. Okay, so now that I can't remember what I was saying slightly during the break,
I don't either.
crap. I was talking a little bit about Destiny because there's still the new content out that I can't even recall what the pricing is for that, but it's like 40 Canadian or something, and it's really hard to justify a cost like, well, any cost for new content that I don't know. It's either you're paying a subscription fee or you're paying for expansion packs or you're paying for microtransactions. And there are games that are like dipping into too many of these things. Subscriptions are, I don't know, they're no longer in vogue. I don't know why, because that seems like the right thing to do. Because I like the idea of budging, but and expansions actually kind of jump out at me for some reason. They pounce, and I won't have planned properly, keeping in mind that there's an expansion, or I don't pay attention, and then just new content drops, and it costs money. Like, okay, well, I guess I spend some of my budget on that. Whereas a game like there is no game that I can like. The only other game that really is popular for the subscription is World of Warcraft, which also makes you pay really good money for their expansions. And mind you, their expansions are a hell of a lot more than what Destiny 2 is dropping because it's whole everything, it's whole game in the game and blah de blah. I don't know if that justifies like $70 or something from them. I do not recall that either. And this is that wonderful moment where you could look stuff up and correct me, but that would be work. Um, so I was asking what kind of content existed in the new whatever the heck, the new League of Destiny. What's going on?
More stuff. Um, it's now an actual expanding storyline. Things are being introduced for this season. They're going seasons of whatever, and this season something got introduced. You're going to interact with an object somewhere in its universe, do the requirements, or do stuff, and do this, get that, essentially.
Okay, so there's a grind. Did
Yeah.
they must have introduced new dungeons. I know there's one that I can't even access because my light level is is 30
Yeah, they
points too
weren't that
low.
introduced.
Everything is all skull and I can't hurt shit. And it's supposedly not matchmaking, so like I zoned in as one single person on this thing that was unbelievably undoable. And so that's a new dungeon. I assume there's a new raid because that tends to be a thing.
Now they're doing like once a year raids now.
Ew. So it's not associated with this money, really? that
Nope.
that's how I would think of it. Well, um, I can't recall what was the other thing that I had brought up. You need to be the one with the memory because I ain't got one. Hmm. We would cut to commercial with a meme while I would think of something, or we would have notes. I like rules. I like knowing rules. Fine, it lets me push things to the outer edge of those rules. You'll see, like, the creator of the rules should notice how it's being used and then just adjust the rules a little bit. If the boundaries are being pushed a little too much, give some warnings, adjust the rules a little, constrain a little bit more so that the edge pushing is someplace you're comfortable with, and then just be done with it. And everybody's happy. I I actually know how many F bombs per hour I'm allowed to utter. I know this stuff. And then I'm good because I can be at least that version of me. You can create that version of your art, of the movie. When you're writing it, you can write it keeping in mind that, you're not supposed to treat certain characters in certain ways because reasons, which you could disagree or not agree with. Like, you can be fine with that, but if you're a writer well before the screenwriting side of stuff, and you're writing and you know that stuff up front, even if you don't like the idea, if you know that up front, you can write around it. You can make a great story that doesn't have to get to those later stages and have to be rewritten, or like you can start and make something beautiful right from the very beginning and then have it like blossom out into a final product that was never constrained by those stupid opinions in the first place. That's actually possible if all that stuff was told up front. So let's take another 10-minute
Yeah,
break
I was gonna say we should
on that
probably.
note.
Yep, recording is paused.
Okay, I'm still not sure if my sensitivity is going to be good for my microphone. So I think you can hear my chair squeak, but we'll figure that out.
Yeah.
So as we were saying between break, we're not really sure how to manage topics. I'm fine with going off on weird rants. I'm getting practice pulling the loop, the thread of thought back on some 10 minutes ago point that I was making. So I'm getting good at actually remembering what my point is. I was a pretty awful several years where I was developing this skill of derailing, interestingly. Now I can derail and just make a really long, interesting point. Um, and so I'm good at doing that, so that the segments are long enough for me to go on fairly long rants. But topics is a problem. And what we had said before is, um, in reviewing a previous show, it is not just to make clips like preview clips. There will be ineloquently put or unresearched or opinions or just bullshittery that happens. Um, that when things are unscripted, that happens. That's kind of that's what real life is. And what happens when reviewing that is there are these opportunities that arise for tiny bits of research or for corrections. And so one of the ways to prompt forward for a future episode is the cool down that I had talked about in the first segment being, even if it takes a couple days, the cool down being trolling through our self-produced content for ideas. And so some things might be touched on and just not said very well. So some notes could be made and just be like, "Oh yeah, I want to bring up," and maybe it's a few minutes of talking, or maybe it's, "Oh, I was totally wrong on this and bring it up. Um, and so that could easily be the entirety of a segment. Maybe it's not appropriate to be the first segment because that might be the first impression a lot of people make, and the first impression people get is probably shouldn't be corrections from previous idiocy. Maybe it needs to be a final segment for the people that are really interested to that fall from show to show. That can handle getting into the third hour, I guess that would be. Um, the Yeah, so the notion of going into and clarifying and riffing off of previous shows, saving that for segment three. I like that idea. Do you ever have an opinion?
I usually do, but sometimes I'm just stay quiet. Right now, I'm just munching on things, so it's muted and I don't bother talking.
Ah, you can either think or eat noodles, just not both.
No,
You'll burn yourself, I suppose. Um, okay, so that's a notion that I mean, I will audit previous stuff. I will pull rough clips out, some ideas, and I will take notes. And I mean that essentially doubles up the amount of work that this is. It's 15 minutes, half an hour lead in, 3 hours of talking with some breaks. Because remember, segment one, taking the breaks is important. And if we were to do this for like 8 hours straight, if the breaks would end up still being maybe 10 minutes. It would have to be really on point, and then it would be, 100% effort, break, 95% effort, break, 80% effort, break, 70% effort, break. And it would go on and on. It would just kind of slowly wane as opposed to just dropping like a rock because you're there solid. If anybody's done, so this is taken off of World of Warcraft rating and where a lot of guilds are quote unquote hardcore, where it is your individual responsibility to go and do the very significant amount of work to gather and create the prerequisites for your character to even get entry into the opportunity to join the group. And then you join the group and the group sits down and just does it again. It just hammers their head against the wall for hours on end. And it's actually gotten a lot better over the decade. Um, in the original days, in what is now called, well, what is now literally called Classic WoW, what was called for a while Vanilla WoW, uh, and things are a little bit weird. The terminology is a little bit weird now, but Classic WoW is the original, no expansion, um, original release of the game, which is out again, which was remastered with the new graphics engine, with a more or less authentic um, reproduction of the gameplay and with the original world and the original quests and all this stuff like as authentic as possible. And rating in that experience originally, like back in the day when people didn't really know what they were doing, like in video games in general, that experience was fairly new and uh, and that game really was bleeding edge for a lot of stuff. And some people would sit down and they would raid for where they would play a certain player versus player um, mass combat thing, and it would go on for hours. And that's just you can't live your life like that, man. If you're 14 and that's your entire life because there's no other video games that are any good at all at the time, and you're competent, you're having enough fun, going at it, like running out to take a pee, or there are actually jokes about it, but it was a thing where you'd have a Gatorade bottle, you drink your Gatorade, and you'd still use your Gatorade bottle, you'd save it because you'd be sitting at your computer for 6 hours straight. You would just not blink. Um, yeah, you get older, and you don't need to do that. You don't actually need to do that. In today's day and age, it's 2020, unfortunately. And today we have other video games. and video games have gotten better. And so we have choice, and I don't have to sit down at the only video game that's any good in the world and grind it for 6 hours straight or more because I could go do something else. I could do anything else. I can just be like, "Yeah, I could tab I have a computer that can tab out of that video game, and I can go and, like, surf this weird internet thing that I've heard about." And, but back then, you you can't tab out of your game. Your computer can't handle that crap. You gotta work for your s I had to work for my 6 frames per second. I didn't have the kind of money to buy a computer that could really play World of Warcraft. Certainly not at like well, back in the day, I was bloody well. I don't know if you knew this, but I in early WoW days, not very early WoW days, but in middle age WoW days, adolescent WoW days, I refused to use Windows, and I don't regret that time in my life. It was a huge waste of time, but I was not emulating, but there was an application compatibility layer that let me play, quote unquote, play World of Warcraft on Linux. And that's what I did. And it was a lot of work. And I managed to get about 6 frames a second, literally. And I would just crash trying to enter into certain areas because there were too many people. My computer couldn't, like, it's a combination of my computer couldn't handle it, plus the tiny little keyhole of a view from Linux to get to something that was like Windows to make the game work. That keyhole was a little too small. I couldn't actually, there was the one time when for some reason I logged in, I guess, and I had crashed or whatever the hell inside that city, and there was nothing there. There was nobody there. I was in a unique instance of it, and there was no player and there was no NPCs either. So there's nothing there. All the other objects, all the other interactive components were not loaded into my client, were not streamed across the network. However, it worked. Happened once. I was able to like just go explore. It was awesome because it was full frame rate. Everything looked great. There was just nothing to do, nowhere to go. So I did that for a while. So that was yeah. Uh, Nowadays things are a little different because you've got Linux native capable games, and even what is it? What's the the big interesting thing is Vulcan. Do you know about that technology?
Nope, because I don't use anything other than Windows.
Well, it's not a Windows thing. So it's like DirectX 11 is common now, although it's like DirectX 9 is still probably the most common. um what do we call it? It's so just like I was talking about CPU related stuff in segment 2 is there is um engine like your video card has certain functionality built in, and newer generations of video cards have had the hardware tweaked to align to allow certain um, APIs, so certain developer exposed components to access a new, more efficient, faster, easier way of doing things. So my graphics card can do this many um, polygons, or it does this stuff, or it does this. And so there's like this video card is DirectX 9 compatible. This one is DirectX 10. DirectX 12, I think, is what's out now. And yes, the bigger number is the better, but the 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 layers between the game you play and the card have to know that the card can do that stuff and have to use it efficiently and effectively. So technically speaking, the games don't they're not gonna bother with using DirectX 12. They're still gonna need to code for DirectX 9 or so because they want to enlarge their audience, their market, to include all those people that have those quote unquote old cards. Now, Vulcan is I Vulcan capable.
Wasn't this
Uh,
sort of like OpenGL?
yeah, exactly. And that's the thing about OpenGL is that's explicitly Linux supported. So it's a very big deal when things rebuild to target OpenGL. OpenGL is much more popular than it used to be. So now video games are actually using like often just both DirectX and OpenGL, and you can just toggle. But it matters. So OpenGL and DirectX is like they're kind of basically the same. And Open like DirectX is just more popular. Vulcan is not like that. Vulcan is Vulcan is the very closest thing to your like it would be the closest thing nudged up against the graphics part of the Unreal Engine. And your video game would be just on the other side of the Unreal Engine. And so technically speaking, the Vulcan graphics processing layer could be swapped out for the thing that understands DirectX or the thing that understands OpenGL. And the Vulcan could target the components that understand the this bit of this video card and that bit of that video card, and the game wouldn't have to, the end like Unreal wouldn't have to care about the version of DirectX and wouldn't it's abstracted a little bit, and I know that I'm getting this a bit wrong. So the Vulkan engine is a little bit nicer than this other stuff that's been happening. And the Vulkan engine is vastly better supported and performing on pure, like just raw native Linux. And so there are games that are now leveraging Vulkan explicitly, and they'll still maintain not adequate, but full, great performing on Windows and on Mac and now on Linux. And I appreciate that. It's too little, too late because I just run Windows full time. Then I have um, I run three different other ways of having an operating system within it. So I actually use Windows Subsystem for Linux just to have it around because it's amusing to have because it's very, very it's do you know anything about you don't know any about this. So
Probably
um
not.
so Windows Subsystem for Linux is Linux for Windows. Why did Microsoft do it backwards? They're idiots. They also want to put Windows first. So it is a Linux subsystem for Windows where you can install a Linux-ish type thing that targets Windows, and it is a Linux in Windows in a little console window. And I've got a little doohickey that lets me run graphical applications as well, and they are the same things that I download with the same package manager for my that I would run on bare metal. It's the same Linux, and in my case, I fiddled with Debian just to be safe. And there's an officially supported Debian, and there's one that does Ubuntu, I think. But I mean, who cares? It's kind of the same thing. I mean, from a technical perspective, they are the same thing, but from a user perspective, Ubuntu is probably easier. But it's command line. It is command line focused with nothing that is official graphic. It's meant for system administrator developer types. They're like nerds like me that need the the Windows has shit tools for everything. It just sucks at everything. And having a lot of system administrators and stuff like that were kind of frustrated and need to have a virtual machine running on Windows in order to put something Linux like on it in order to get access to the tools that adults use to manage servers and to do all this other kind of stuff. And 20 years too late, Microsoft realizes that this stuff is important to put this crap in place. And it's been updated to be much more authentic, but I haven't played with the newer stuff. I will. So I've got that running, and that's meant for like if I it's I'm not gonna make bloody batch files, and I'm not gonna bother learning this freaking I can't even remember what it's called. Let's go. Windows X. Uh, I can't even remember the name of the CMD replacement that Windows uses now. Like shell, whatever the hell. I'm not gonna learn that new scripting language, that environment. I'm not gonna bother. Whatever it happens to be, it's probably really great and powerful and stuff. But I know pure shell scripting, dash, vanilla shell, bash, ZSH in my case, so well that I can do absolute magic to automate, to perform certain tasks. And so I've got that, but I also have two separate virtual machines that run Linuxes. And I can do all three at the same time. And I usually do, like right now, I have two of them running and they're not actually doing anything. They're just paused, but um, that is my gateway into the Linux that I normally use. And those are, for all they know, they are authentic Linux experiences. So graphical and all this kind of crap. And I can just tab out into that experience. Um, and for video games, I just run it on the main host Windows system that I have. And I otherwise try not to rely on Windows for anything because it just sucks at everything. And I tack on a bunch of stuff to get some functionality that's a little Linux like, so it's not insane. Because not being able to like hold the Alt key down and drag windows around, it really frustrates me. So I had to get a tool that lets me do that, and like but it lets me do things like just install this Discord client without going and fiddling with using a web browser. Because if I was just using Linux, I'd only have the web browser, which would be a pain in the ass because the hotkeys only work when you're tabbed into the browser and all this other nonsense. Um, so like I'll use the I'll use Edge is probably what I'm going to be using from now on. Do you know about Microsoft Edge? About the history of it? Probably not again. So
Not not entirely, but it wasn't
okay,
Edge. Jesus, but wasn't Edge just improved IE?
kind of yeah. That's the best way of thinking about it. So Internet Explorer. Um, so first off, Microsoft are bastards. Let's just get that out of the way. I'm not sure many people will understand what I mean by that. But whatever you think of Microsoft, whatever incarnation, whatever donations, whatever happy fun, they are bastards. They've never changed. They will always be bastards. If you think they are being nice, if you think they are doing good in the world, you do not know them. They are bastards. In the early days of Windows, Microsoft, okay, we're bastards. Follow along with me. So, Microsoft being bastards in the early days of Windows had this internet thing, this new internet thing, um, was up and coming and interesting, and but you needed a special program to render, to download and render this content and display the images and stuff and fiddle with things and so a lot of people were asking for this functionality. And what Microsoft did is they shipped Windows, which often came with the computer because Microsoft and there was a Microsoft tax. So usually, what would happen is the company that would assemble a computer to sell the product would also raise the price, and they would use that extra money to pay Microsoft to put Windows on it. So you'd have a legal copy of Windows installed, and you, as the end consumer, would have no choice. You'd be buying a computer. You will have already paid for the license. Windows will already be put on it. Most people wouldn't care, but Linux guys like me, yeah, we were just paying a tax for a thing that we don't want that we don't want to exist in the world because Microsoft are bastards. Now, one of the reasons why Microsoft are bastards, but not the only one at the time, let's say, and in the context of the culture of back in the early Windows days, Microsoft included Internet Explorer with Windows. So it was cooked into the computer, included with a web browser cooked in. And that was considered anti-competitive. I could say that as a blanket statement. Anti-competition is a concept in American law for how businesses operate. And it was considered anti-competitive for them to cook in a web browser because there were other web browsers on the market, most notably Netscape Navigator, but also there were some other stuff like Opera, and there were other choices that were out there. And those other companies couldn't get their foot in the door because people would already have Internet Explorer. And even if they produced a better product, which wasn't hard because Microsoft were being fairly fast and loose with a lot of their extra programming back then, things were they were concerned about capturing market more than making a quality product and having that quality speak for itself, and that quality is edging out competitors, defeating them on the fairly on the battlefield. They were using a lot of dirty tricks because Microsoft are bastards. Okay, so I'll just beat that dead horse forever. It's never rotting because Microsoft are still bastards. And Edge is so Internet Explorer being a piece of shit and being always having been, I mean, from so many angles, it was garbage. It was just garbage. Um, at some point, so much legacy it had the thing is it had to stay the way it was because it was kind of like a frozen compatibility moment in time. And there were a lot of websites that, because Microsoft are bastards, Internet Explorer had its nuances and certain websites needed to build for those nuances. And there's a feedback loop where Internet Explorer couldn't grow the hell up, stop being a bunch of bastards, and actually be standards compliant because standards wasn't a thing really originally. And then Microsoft is like, well, we'll make Internet Explorer do this other thing if websites built for this other thing. We're not going to wait for the standards to improve, which was kind of a good idea because there was a lot of stuff that, I mean, the bodies that were reforming standards were slow as hell. That's why the internet took a little bit while to take off the way it has because a lot of the decision making on saying yes to certain functionality took a lot of time to hammer out. As well as developers were maturing in terms of how to understand things and how to develop things and how to define things. It all took time, but Internet Explorer had its own little warts that it was putting on. And then websites started building for those warts because Internet Explorer was the most popular web browser because Microsoft are a bunch of bastards. And yet there were other browsers that were coming out that had their own interpretations and their own nuances, and they might be slightly different from Internet Explorer. So you ended up with these websites that would be like, they would detect what web browser is there, which is still a thing now. And then they would send different data for different web browsers. And the thing is, a lot of people were still using Internet Explorer for a very long time, and a lot of those websites were snapshots in time that had necessary compatibility leveraging Internet Explorer very specifically, and they would break on things that were not Internet Explorer. And this was enough of it's not a problem now, but it was enough of a problem at a critical point. Then when Microsoft decided that they needed to like separate from the past and create a new web browser from scratch because Internet Explorer was really trash. Like, it is bad. It's just you have no idea how bad it is. It was a big fat security flaw and it was dumb. And so Edge came out, and it was rather fascinating because Edge came out and there were already other very mature good browsers. And I'm thinking, okay, Microsoft, now you're on your back foot because you're coming out into a market that has already utterly obliterated Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer it was literally a joke at the time. It had been a joke for a very very long time. So all these new products were there and were had actually started winning even with that the disadvantage of having to target an operating system that already had a web browser. They were better. And people would laugh that Internet Explorer is the program you launch to download Firefox. That was the running joke. Now it's Chrome. Um, but Google are a bunch of bastards. So, I mean, they're whatever mega corporations. Yeah. And Edge, as the lineage goes, it was impressive. I knew it would be a money and effort sink, but Microsoft could do it because although they are a bunch of bastards, they have always been very good about project management and about programming. And when they actually do get their shit together and care, and they stop caring too much about money, they can make software that will utterly obliterate anybody except these days, except for Alphabet Incorporated, what you would used to call Google, who are just smarter with their developing. They got smarter nerds, but Microsoft can still do a damn fine job. And so they brought out Edge, and Edge is not very good at all. And so they came out late to the game. They brought out Edge. Edge had nothing that people cared about, so they didn't bother. They didn't switch, and they didn't bother with it. So it might have been around, and they like, oh, I happened to click a link and it popped up Edge instead of Chrome. I'd be like, okay, well, I'll surf this one time for this, but like I'll close it and maybe I'll cut and paste the bookmark into Chrome, and then I'll just use that because that's got all my bookmarks, or that's the thing, or whatever. So Edge kind of lingered, and it lingered, and Microsoft didn't do anything to make it stand out, to make it better, to anything. Like the tradition with Microsoft, because they're a bunch of bastards, is they would understand their underlying operating system so well, with some sneaky tricks too, is they could build software for their own stuff that's better than what other people can build for that stuff because Microsoft had inside knowledge. Again, stuff that they were called out on that they broke the law with. But they could have done that with Edge and just, hey, for some reason Edge uses less memory and is faster. Oh yeah, it must be because Microsoft are really great programmers, but it's because they use some dirty tricks on the inside, and Windows can have some internal engine stuff that Microsoft knows about but doesn't talk about fully for other, and so their competition happens to run worse because the competition doesn't know about this certain stuff, or doesn't know how to do it as well as Microsoft does. They could have done that, maybe. They probably would have been raked across the coals for doing that, but they probably could have gotten away with a little of that and never been caught. They didn't do that. They didn't make a better product. They didn't understand their market better. They didn't. So they had Internet Explorer around still, and then they made Edge. And now recently, very recently, in fact, like literally days ago, Microsoft had announced earlier, but they made it a thing where they were no longer targeting were no longer making their own rendering engine from scratch, and they were no longer building their interface from scratch. Well, that's the web browsers. Is these two things? It's the thing that downloads stuff, that assembles it, and that gives you the pretty picture that you can scroll through and interact with. The pictures and text. That's the rendering engine behind it. And then the interface is this thing that is the window you're looking through. So it's the thing that manages your bookmarks. It's the thing with the scroll bar and the menus and stuff. And they made both of those components. And Microsoft had announced that they would throw in the towel. And it's the strangest thing to hear from anyone, from any major corporation, because usually what you just do is you'd eat it until the end of time, is you would have developers that would make this specialized product that nobody would use, just like Internet Explorer. They were trying to phase out Internet Explorer, and I think they either have or they will shortly, and just be like, nah, we're no longer compatible, because they're no longer compatible with Windows 3.1 software, which I think is stupid and a shame, but I'm going to virtualize a machine to get that environment back when I get around to using that old software. And so what they announced, and what was shocking, is they would dump their rendering engine for the one being used by Chrome, and they would dump their interface for a modified version of the one being used by Chrome. They gave up. They gave up. They dropped everything. They threw in the towel. They went, "Eh." No websites were targeting Edge specifically because that's not really a thing anymore. Um, and so they just it's done. I have a new desktop icon for a new Edge, and I can't remember what the old one looks like, so I and it's just it's Chrome to me, so I'm just gonna go use Chrome instead. Um, but I might, um I mean, Google can go suck it, but I'd still be using their product if I use Edge. So I might have it just to like play pretend to be a Windows user. Otherwise, I use Linux rooted stuff for a web browser. So that's like a 20-minute rant on Microsoft being a bunch of bastards, Edge being a complete failure, Internet Explorer sucking ass, um, and Chrome. So I mean, what do we have? We've got like 10 minutes. Do you want? We have
Yeah,
no idea what to talk about. I told you I could
yeah, we'll
pull
stop for
something out of my
we'll call it
ass.
out for now. So we just call it
Well, I
now.
mean, technically on the clock, we've got another 12 minutes. So if there's something else you want to bring up really quick,
No, not
I mean,
really.
no,
Not today.
you're always tired
I'm not tired.
uh,
I'm just out of it right now.
out of it. The
In a
noodles
lull.
now, all the carbs in the noodles are making you,
Sure.
hurt, affecting your brain. Little insulin resistance happening there, and the carbs are making you tired. And working on your type 2 diabetes.
Yes. How's
You eat
yours?
healthier than me, so that's never going to be a thing. Okay, so we're gonna stop, and then in a couple days. So after we're done,
Stopping the recording.
you're tired now. So let's say tomorrow.